Welcome everyone to podcast episode number 10. Woo, double digits. Okay, so we're going to be breaking down the sermon, Pick the Battlefield, within the sermon series, Decisive Battles. And so, Phil, can you just set the scene for what we're talking about today?
Absolutely. So there's a moment in history, 9 AD, where the Romans are sent forth. Augustus wants to take the land beyond the Rhine River. And he wants it under full-on Roman control, taxes, everything. Right now it's kind of peaceful toward Rome, but they just kind of like an easy, awkward relationship. And previously when they went in to conquer some of those lands, to show that those lands would be peaceful toward the Romans, anytime they conquered them, the chieftains would send their sons back to Rome as a sign of like submission. And so there was a guy named Arminius, where his dad was a Germanic chieftain, sends Arminius and his brother to Roman control. Arminius is raised Roman, taught Latin, taught battlefields, moves up in the ranks of the Roman army, and then also becomes a Roman citizen. He's so good at what he does. And so that's the prized possession of the time. I mean, a Roman citizen is at the top of the world. Right. And so Augustus wants this new land. He wants it fully Roman across the Rhine River in Germanic territory. He sends a general named Varus. And so as Varus goes out, a lot of times they'll send the people they've conscripted or taken from those lands to help be guides and rally troops to their area. And so Arminius is put under Varus's control and sent forth, and Varus immediately takes to Arminius. He sees him as a prodigy, a great friend, someone he really leans on and trusts. And as they go through the Teutoburg Forest, there's this internal conflict that happens in Arminius. He realizes, I'm going to take the Romans to absolutely put oppression on all the Germanic people. And he goes, man, I don't think I can do that. And so he decides, maybe I can do something to help. And so he goes to Varus and says, hey, let me take all of our conscripted troops, all these, people from this area that are with me. Let's go try to rally troops to our cause. And Varus goes, absolutely. It's not an uncommon thing for the Romans to use their people from that area to go draw people to them. Because one, it's less people we have to fight. And then two, it's just more people in our army. Yeah. And so Arminius leads all of their troops, and he leaves Varus with just the 3 Roman legions. And I say just, those were the premier fighting force of the time. That's why Varus is totally okay doing this. That dude slept easy at night with 3 legions around him. And so Arminius takes all the troops into the woods. They disappear to go, quote, rally troops. And so Varus leads them further and further into the Teutoburg Forest. They have small skirmishes and ambushes that happen, just to mess with a little bit. Varus doesn't worry about this. The legions can handle any small little skirmish. Yeah. But they get further into the forest, and it becomes harder and harder to walk through the area. There's trees that have fallen down, and the path begins to get smaller and smaller. It begins to get 4 miles wide, but it's less than 200 yards wide. So it's 4 miles long, less than 200 yards wide. It's very narrow, and it's the perfect place for an ambush, and Arminius knew it. And so as they get to this pass, and the Romans are all spread out, they're in thin lines, Arminius sends thousands of barbarians pouring out of the forest. And then on one side there's a marsh, the other side there's this hill. It was even discovered as they excavated the area that it looks like the barbarians built ramparts to hide behind and make it where they could run down onto the Roman army. And so there's pure chaos. The line for the Romans is so long, they don't have communication. They don't know what's happening. Right. You could be so far back that you could hear muffled screams or something, but you don't know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so the Romans, though, they're the best fighters in the world, arguably, fend off 1 day of attack. They fend off 2 days of attack, but finally on day 3, they're spread out, they're broken apart, and it begins to collapse around Varus. And he knows, I'm about to be captured, and I can't be. And so he falls on his sword, kills himself. No Romans survive. If they didn't get out on basically day 1, basically no one is left alive. It was said at the times that the Roman bones that were just left there marked the boundary of the Roman Empire. And so this decimating win is unheard of win for barbarians to beat Roman legions. Yeah. But he did it because Arminius picked the battlefield. He picked the place where he knew, my troops will be at our strongest. We can surprise attack. We can be quick, agile, split up the Roman army. And the Romans will be at their weakest because any of their battlefield tactics won't work in such a small pass. They can't work the way they usually do. And he upsets a giant. It was like a David versus Goliath kind of upset. Mm. And it's all because Arminius was intelligent, smart, and he picked the battlefield that worked best for him and worse for his enemy.
Mm. Man, what a story. Gosh.
I know.
And so, look, appropriating this to like our relationship and our sanctification, following Jesus, like what can we take from this to move forward?
Well, Peter tells us in the New Testament in 1 Peter 5:8, he says, our enemy is like a roaring lion looking to devour us.
Yeah.
I always say it's not like he's like trying to scratch us or nibble us or maybe even, if he's really lucky, wound us. He wants to devour us, like take us out.
Yeah.
And he wants to be like Arminius, where I don't want to just beat the Romans. I want them wiped out. Yeah. And so the enemy comes into our lives looking to devour us. But if we don't understand that he's trying to pick the battlefield, like if we don't understand that the enemy is even 50 million times better than Arminius at picking the battlefield where you and I are at our weakest and he's at his strongest, we're going to constantly end up like Varus going, oh my gosh, I'm about to lose everything. Like I'm getting decimated. We have to be cognizant that there's an enemy that wants to devour us. And he doesn't take any breaks.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand the enemy's always looking to pick the battlefield. And we have to become a general almost in life of realizing we have to start picking our battlefield. I mean, if we could go back and tell Varus, hey, you shouldn't go through the Teutoburg Forest because there's going to be a pass like this and your enemy can work like this and ambush you here. He's probably going to go, oh yeah, no, I probably shouldn't go there. But how many times do we go, yeah, I don't really worry about a roaring lion who wants to devour me. I don't really worry about my flesh. Or I'm pretty good, or I'll be fine. I mean, I'll be fine is the infamous last words of all of us before we fall into sin.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll be fine going out with her, or I'll be fine looking at this, or I'll be fine hanging out with this group of people. I'll be fine with no one watching me financially. I'll be fine is our last words before we fall in sin. And I'm sure Varus said with his 3 legions, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then the last thing Rome ever heard of Varus was actually they beheaded him and sent his head back to Rome. That's actually how Rome found out they'd lost the battle. They didn't even know anything had happened.
Yikes.
Oof. But I'll be fine, right?
Right.
Well, and I think if I could add to that, I think a lot of times too we treat sin in a reactive way instead of a proactive way. We let sin just kind of rule us, and we allow circumstances to just come onto us in a reactive way instead of actually being proactive and saying and picking a battle and saying, okay, I know this is where the enemy tries to attack me, so I'm going to be proactive and put barriers up, soldiers here, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this too speaks to like we need to be careful who we're following. Like Varus was following Arminius into this area that Arminius knew well, but Varus didn't. And so I think it speaks to like our community, like who are we surrounding ourselves with, and like can we actually trust this person or this business or whatever it may be. And there needs to be accountability there for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So moving on from that, you go into how our flesh wants to rebel against the Lord just by its nature. It's just a part of the human condition. And in Romans 7, Paul breaks this down super well. And I would like to camp out here for a second and the difference between sin and the person. And Paul does a great job of like making sure we know the difference there. But sometimes it's hard for us to separate people from their sin. And we mix them together and say, this person is a liar or this person is evil in whatever way it may be, but in reality, like they're struggling with something that is actually battling them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes I wonder if it's Christians' faults that we think this way. Like how many times do Christians now label people by the sin they're wrestling with as that's who you are?
Yeah.
And now we're getting to the point where people actually do say, this is a part of me. Like this is part of my identity.
Yeah.
Is that our fault as Christians? Like, have we told people so many times, you're a sinner, this is who you are, and now they accept this is who I am, it is part of my identity, and now I'm just going to be a little spiteful, I'm going to be proud of it.
Yeah.
And then we go, oh, how outrageous is that?
Right.
Is it really our fault? Have we not been able to communicate people that, yes, you have a flesh, yes, you do live in sin, but so do we, and our one hope, your hope, my hope, is Jesus. If we want our identity to change, it's Jesus. Is that happening in our world because we've done a poor job communicating the gospel and the importance of Jesus to everyone? I don't know the answer to that question, but I lean it is partially our fault. Like we've done a poor job with the gospel in the love of Jesus Christ wanting to renew us, that we've just let people accept, whether you're a Christian or not, that sin can be part of our identity. It can be who we are, and even worse, it's all we can be. And Jesus in the gospel would go, no, I literally died for that not to be the case.
Yeah. Man. And that honestly sets people up for failure when it comes to following Jesus by like saying, oh yeah, you can actually live according to what you want to do and not according to what Jesus has asked you to do. Because then once you get into it and the Holy Spirit like convicts you of something, you're like, this is what I signed up for, you know?
Wait a minute, I've got to deny myself?
Yeah.
Who told me that?
Right. Who said that? Check the source on that. So yeah, and so kind of transitioning, using that as like a stepping stone into the next half of the sermon, you guys talked about like a moment, a decisive battle in your marriage and in your relationship. Can you guys just move into that with me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so the moment that you're talking about, Desi, is when I kind of open up and talk about how, in high school I got addicted to pornography, went off to college, the Lord kind of calls me back to repentance, and I realize it's something I've got to deal with. And I sit down finally to talk to a guy named Reagan, who was actually the one who invited me to a Bible study where the Lord spoke to me and called me to give my life back to him, and just a great young man of God. And so I sit down and finally work up the courage to tell him I'm struggling with this. And I go, I hadn't really wanted to tell anyone because I hated myself for looking at it. Like, even though I was rebelling against God and living for myself, I still hated it. Yeah. And I hated that I felt like something owned me. And so talk to Reagan, and he gives this insight, this moment. I thought he was going to like hate me or like put me down or anything. And really in the moment, he just looks at me, like his facial expression didn't even change. It floored me. And he goes, the Lord doesn't want to end you. He wants to renew you. And it blew my mind that, wait a minute, you don't hate me, or you don't even see me the way I see myself, and that you're telling me God wants to renew me in spite of my sin? He wants to restore me in spite of how broken I am? What?
Yeah.
And so he works as being an accountability partner with me. Reagan spends, years working and trying to help me grow my faith and who I am. And I moved further and further along where my relapses would be further and further apart. But there was still a time where either I was super stressed or very discouraged or feeling unwanted that I would have fall back into it. I would relapse. And that even carried into when I was a youth pastor. I thought, surely when I'm a youth pastor, I'll get away. Or surely when I get engaged, I'll go away. And none of that happened. And so we finally get to this point where Kaylin, as we're engaged, asks, have you looked at pornography? And I lied, because I had this panic moment again of, my gosh, if I tell her, she'll hate me. She'll leave me. If she leaves me, then the church will ask me, why did she leave you? I'll lose my job. I'll lose her. I'll lose my job. I'll lose everything. And the Lord kind of spoke to me through an illustration, and we were walking together, and I went to take a step with Jesus, and it was like I had a chain around my ankle, and it clinked. Like the slack went down the chain. I couldn't go any further. And Jesus took several steps forward, and he turned around and he said, you can't follow me while you're still in chains to something. And I realized that night, I have to deal with this. And so as much as I didn't want to, I had to decide if I trust Jesus or not. If he's telling me I have to go back and tell Kaylin the truth, then I either do or I don't. And so the next day I tell her, hey, I lied and I have looked at pornography. And, I joked with the church, that went about as well as it could because I'm still alive. She didn't kill me. So that went about as well as that conversation could have gone. And so, I'd love for Kaylin to kind of share her perspective, because I think a lot of us out there, either one or two of kind of can relate to one of our sides of the story. Somebody has done something that's kind of had a ripple effect in your life and it's hurt. Or you're kind of maybe on my side of like your decisive battle's not only hurting you, but now it's hurting other people. Yeah. So Kaylin, why don't you kind of talk about, what are you dealing with, the emotions you're dealing with when, I fess up that not only have I done what you asked, but I've lied too.
Yeah, sure. So it was, I think I mentioned it on Sunday too, but it was pretty much every emotion that you could probably think. Anger, frustration, sadness, disappointment, just a plethora. And then, then being kind of a female, I was struggling. Then I was having my own decisive battle on, the enemy trying to take advantage of insecurities and things like that. And, I was having to check my source on that.
Right.
So I was dealing with that internal battle and then kind of the circumstantial battle. Going back to the part about being able to separate the sin from the person, I had asked that question to Phil, not to kind of like have this thing where I could like hold over his head or rake him over the coals or, beat him down, but more so statistically, I knew the answer and I just wanted to know, to be able to prepare, talk about it, communicate, especially walking into marriage, and be an open book. And then be able to fight. And I think being able to separate the two, the sin with the person it's able to be done when the person that's maybe perpetrating the sin is willing to fight. And we kind of discussed it while we were, talking about it on Sunday, but I can't fight that battle for him.
Yeah.
And so me being able to separate the two was heavily predicated on him going, yes, I am definitely repentant and I want to fight this. And so I was able to say, okay, if that's the case, I'm not going to pick up the sword and fight alongside the devil and, beat him down while he's trying to fight. I'm going to come alongside and fight alongside him and whatever that looks like. So, yeah.
And I think at that point, like, if that's exactly what Satan would want us to do mesh the person with his or her sin and then get on his side and beat that person down. Because at that point, then Satan's job is done and he doesn't have to do anything. The person is just on a hamster wheel, like falling back into it and being crushed down. So.
Right.
Yeah. So, kind of moving into the last little part here. Kaylin, you gave like a little bit of advice, for the person who may be in a similar situation or in a relationship like this. And so. Yeah.
The first I would say is you're not alone. I didn't even mention this on Sunday, but again, statistically speaking, like this is not an uncommon thing at all.
Totally.
Specifically about this issue. There's other issues that this could be applicable for, but this one specifically, statistically, you are not alone by any means. And so I would encourage people to find somebody to talk to. And I would probably say more of a mentor type person than, I think it's important for friends and to people to support you, but find somebody who's maybe been through something similar, that can speak wisdom and guidance, give you proactive advice in those circumstances, tell you how those battles look like, what it looks like to fight those battles for could be the rest of your life potentially, and so that would be a huge piece of advice. Yeah,
totally. Having people around you, it's invaluable.
Yes.
To have good community to fight those battles alongside you, no matter what they look like. I cherish my mentor so much, and being able to walk through that, and ask for prayer and know someone's praying for you and have tactical plans to fight against those temptations and things like that.
Right.
So Phil, one of the things you talked about was like, don't go where you're going to get slaughtered. And for this, from now on, the Roman Empire, they're like, we're not going past the Rhine River because that's our boundary. We know if we go any further past that, we're just going to add to the pile of bones that's already there. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for me, I realized that the past where the Romans were getting slaughtered, that became my phone for me. I realized the ability to go, I'm mostly fine, I'm usually good, I'm not usually tempted anymore, was leading to, the eventual relapse, however long it took me to get there, because I just kept leaving myself open to an ambush on my phone. And so for me, it kind of sat down and said, I'm not going to let the enemy pick the battlefield anymore. And so for me, what that looked like was I'm going to remove the internet off my phone. And so Kaylin actually, for like 6 years now, has had the passcode to my phone, and I don't have internet anymore. And I'm not saying everyone needs to go do that, but for me, that's what it took. It was going, I'm not going to let the enemy pick the battlefield. I know, unfortunately, because I let myself get addicted in high school, that this is probably something I'm going to have to be on my guard against the rest of my life. Yeah. But I won't have to fight the battle on my phone anymore, where I kept losing badly. Yeah. And, that's why I've had, accountability software on my computer since, I've spoke with Reagan, however many years ago. It was like 13 years ago now. It's because I'm not going to let myself fight on a battlefield that's so disadvantageous to me. It's something I'm always going to have to be guard on, and people, I think, if they want to, they can judge me, go, oh my gosh, you're a pastor and you struggle with this. Usually I don't, but why would I ever go, man, yeah, I only go through the Teutoburg Forest every 5 years.
I'm fine.
I'm fine, said
Right.
Varys. And so
Arminius is cool, right?
Yeah. And so for me, it's like, why would I ever go back through the Teutoburg Forest? I know that's a bad place for me to be at. Yeah. Even if I get through safely 99 out of 100 times, like, why would I ever let myself, get ambushed once, And so for me, I have to start picking the battlefield. I have to be aware it's probably something I have to be on guard of, because I don't know when the enemy's going to show up to, attack again next. Like, I don't know when that temptation's going to hit again. I know the enemy's a roaring lion that wants to devour me, and so I need to be on my guard. And for me, that's what it's looked like, of putting up some real boundaries and going, I know I may have to fight the battle the rest of my life. I just won't fight it on the grounds that's so so advantageous to the enemy.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, and that goes along with the decisive battle that we're both fighting, because I have the passcode, and so as a spouse, if, then he's, hey, can you unlock my phone in different circumstances for playing a game with friends and stuff like that, and so I have to know that that's going to be the case. I'm going to have to unlock the phone at certain points, and it might be at public places and things like that, and so yeah.
And like, for the listener out there that's not married or in a relationship, I have a friend who has the passcode to my phone, because I'm in the same situation. Like, I can't trust myself to have internet access on my phone like that, just like unrestricted. And so that was actually like a huge trajectory shift in my life as well. It's like having that boundary set up so that it's not even an option to go through the Teutoburg Forest anymore,
right?
And so, yeah, set up boundaries where you win the battle before it even begins. In this part of the sermon, you bring up Psalm 32:5, where David is acknowledging and confessing his sin. And going off of that, you laid out like a couple solid points for people listening. The first point is confession heals, even though it hurts. It's shining the light on our sin is actually, even though it may be uncomfortable and like risky, we got to put our neck out there and trust that the Lord is going to bear fruit in that hard conversation, whatever it is. It's going to be healing. And the second one is pick the battlefield, or it will be chosen for you. And gosh, back to the boundaries, whatever they need to be. It's so good to win it before it begins. And the third one is a couple resources that you listed out. There's Christian counseling that you can go to. That's a specific one in Cleveland that you mentioned. And I'm sure if a listener wanted to get more information about that, they can reach out.
Yeah, we'll put all the links to all this in the podcast notes.
Yeah, totally. And you guys can reach out to Phil or Chris or myself, and we'd love to talk to you about any of these resources. But yeah, so what do you feel like is the one takeaway thing for the Armory section of the podcast that the listener needs to take with them as they go from here?
Don't buy the lie that you're the only one struggling and you need to stay by yourself.
Oof.
Yeah.
I bought that for so long that I genuinely, and people may find it laughable, I genuinely believed through high school that I was the only one struggling with pornography. Like, I had believed and stayed in isolation for so long that I'm the wretched person and I hate myself and no one can know. You've got to find someone to bring in. Like, I'm not saying to go spread it to the whole world, but find someone like Reagan, or, for me, it was Pastor David as well later on. Like, find someone that you can trust and who will look at you and believe. God doesn't want to end you. He wants to renew you. He wants to restore you. And I think we've got to understand, going into the light and like Psalm 32 tells, confessing to the Lord is not going to break us. It's actually going to bring healing. And so don't stay in the dark anymore. If you're wrestling with it, whether it's a credit card your spouse doesn't know about, or, whether it is pornography or, gluttony, whatever gossip, whatever you are struggling with, find someone to bring it into the light with and confess before the Lord, and find someone else that's going to rally around you and push you to walk in the light. Because at some point we've got to do that for ourselves, to confess, but also can we just be people who help each other? Mm-hmm. Can we actually create a community where we're like literally cheering you on to fight those battles? And we'll do whatever we can to help you win, because we want to have a community that sees all of us step into what Jesus has for us, to step into that healing, that restoration that Jesus wants to bring in our life. And we're literally cheering each other on to see it happen.
That's so good. Yeah, the thing for me is, like, a lot of times when I listen to a podcast or like people from the church or something like this, I'm like, man, they've got it together. Like, if I could just be like Craig McCall or Craig Groeschel, like, I just look at these people, I look up to them, and I just want to say again, like I've mentioned this before, like the people who are following Jesus are not people who have it together. They're people who have realized that they didn't, and took a step in the right direction and made a change, and so it's just a lot of broken people who've come together and they found where the food is, they found where the source is of life. And so anybody out there that's struggling with something, like, this is a safe space to talk about these things and confess and like seek healing in Jesus.
Yeah.
What about you, Kaylin? Anything to add for the listener out there?
I was going to say, chop your hand off. No. No, but I mean, that scripture is applicable, right? I mean, if you're serious about following the Lord, I mean, it's going to be a sacrifice. And sometimes that's not all the time communicated, and people don't realize, you might not have internet on your phone, or you might have accountability software on your computer, or you might not go to the water cooler at work and be a loner, quote unquote, whatever it is, but it's, to follow the Lord, it does require sacrifice. And so that's what I'm saying.
Good stuff. Awesome. We'll have a couple of things in the show notes for you guys to check out. And otherwise, that's all we got for this week.
Absolutely. Shout out to Austin Watson behind the cameras, all things tech and media. Let's thank my wife, Kaylin, for joining us. If you
pleasure.
Enjoyed the podcast, make sure to like it, rate it, and subscribe. We'd love to have you join in with us. And we'll even start adding in our emails if you want to email in some questions as well for us. We love you guys, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Adios.